I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year zero. Today I have a guest, Sheldon Richman. He is the executive editor at the Libertarian Institute.org, also co founder of the Libertarian Institute.org, and the editor at, or an editor at Center for a Stateless Society. He's also authored several books, the latest of which is called What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. And we discuss that a little bit during this episode. So I hope y'all all go out and get that. So far, it's really interesting. I started reading it a couple of days ago, as you will hear. And I really hope y'all get into it. So I decided to have Sheldon on to discuss why libertarians should be talking about laissez-faire as freed markets rather than capitalism. So enjoy the podcast. Okay, we are recording. I am here with Sheldon Richman. How's it going, Sheldon?
It's going all right under these weird circumstances, but I'm hanging in.
Yeah, well, I think that's the best any of us can do. I'm lucky. Like I told you, I'm a truck driver, so I'm lucky. It really hadn't affected my life any, and my wife works from home, so it really hadn't affected her any. So we're just all like, whatever. It's just I can't tell you how many times I get turned around at a door and told to go put a mask on because I just totally forget what's going on. So,
yeah.
I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, my bad. But hey, you got a new book coming out. I want to talk about that. It's out on it's out on Kindle right now, isn't it?
Yep.
What social animals owe to each other?
And paperback. Yeah, what social animals owe to each other. I'm holding up for your benefit. Yeah, it's on softback, paperback and Kindle.
Okay. Well, I got it on Kindle and I started reading it yesterday actually. So I'm 2 chapters into it, and I'm really enjoying it. I ran into you because of Scott Horton, obviously. We were on the phone one time, and I was talking to him about the fault of using capitalism as a term. And I had run across this idea listening to Per Byland on Pete, Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast. And I was talking to Scott about it, and Scott's like, "You sound like a Richmonian or Richmondonian or whatever." And I was like, "Who are you talking about?" And he was like, "Sheldon Richman, the co-founder of Libertarian Institute." I was like, "Oh, I need to start reading his stuff." And that's how I found the Center for a Stateless Society, was going through your stuff. So yeah, you're doing good work.
I've been around a while. I've had the time to get around. Chronologically, I've had the time. I've been at this. To round it off, let's say 1970. So I've been at it a while.
Yeah, well, and you make a point in one of your essays that's in the book, Markets Not Capitalism. You make a point that it's not just a semantic argument. Can you walk me through that, like your thinking on that?
Sure. And there's a book, a collection of articles that I contributed to that C4SS, the Center for a Stateless Society, put out, called "Markets Not Capitalism," because we really wanted to hit that head on.
Is that's the book with Gary Chartier and Johnson?
Yeah, Roderick Long,
yes.
Kevin Carson, and then it also has some classic essays from long dead people.
Proudhon is in there. Benjamin Tucker.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a hit because we want to trace history. We have roots, so we go back. But you can find certainly a phase of Rothbard and Roy Childs. These are names that may or may not be familiar. Carl Hess, that we think have that sort of left libertarian flavor. That's the term we use. So the semantic point is that, well, the word is so freighted with all kinds of weights and baggage that everybody reads into it what they want. So it's not a terribly useful thing. I mean, you hear libertarians praising capitalism, and you have people on the left who don't like it, and a lot of people actually on the right don't like it either. They think it's that all that means is markets are all that matter, and people only care about material things. And but historically, what is known as capitalism and what people have in mind, many people have in mind, what was in England and then the United States, beginning in the 18th century, and then certainly in the 19th century and much of the 20th century. They regard that as being capitalism. Now, those were eras where the market was an important factor in life, post feudalism, right, post the Middle Ages, beginning in modernity. But it's a mistake to think that that was anything like laissez-faire, separation of economy and state, where people were left to cooperate and compete without government in any way putting its thumb on the scale for anybody. And yet you can't find an era where that was actually the case. And so we who support the free market, we who consider ourselves, radical advocates of the free market, and classical liberalism generally, today we would call libertarianism, don't want to associate with that era, that broad era of the West. And so we felt it's better, and we had predecessors who took this position, that the word capitalism just doesn't capture what it is we want to capture. First of all, it does sound like capitalist privilege. We're picking out capital for the name and then putting an ism on the end. So aesthetically, I don't find it an attractive word.
Right.
Because and since an awful lot of people already associate it with privilege for owners of capital, which means to the detriment of workers and anybody else, we just thought it was important to revive this distinction and separate ourselves from that word. I mean, we can find that there's an early English, again, 19th century radical liberal, I'd call him, Thomas Hodgkin, who was one of the first people to use capitalist in a pejorative way, even though he's fully free market. So, there's precedent for this. I mean, people have the impression that Marx was the first person to use capitalism or capitalist, but in fact, he's not. And there were, radical free market advocates have used it in the negative way that we're using it, where there was a privileged class that had ties to the state, who got benefits that you couldn't achieve in the marketplace. So that's part of what we have in mind in separating those two words. Free market from
Right, and it was my discovery of an agorist primer, said Samuel Edward Konkin III. Whenever I discovered that it wasn't Marx that coined that term, that it was Thomas Hodgkin was using it, well before Marx. And it wasn't until the 20th century, into the Industrial Revolution, that the term capitalism began getting used as Ayn Rand or Mises had used it. Am I correct on that?
That's right. It wasn't the preferred term until we get into the 40s and 50s. Okay. Where Mises, who I love, and Rand, who in many respects I like, although I think there are lots of shortcomings, but they embraced the word. Exactly why they did, I'm not sure. Whether they heard it from other people and thought, okay, this is our term. This is the term we mean. And I certainly earlier in my early days of being an advocate here, I used it also. So it's kind of a later development in the last 10 years or so that the people brought it to my attention, and the group of us that around C4SS who regard ourselves as left libertarians began to see that word, it's not helpful. A lot of people attach good things to it and mean laissez-faire. I mean, Rand often modified it by saying laissez-faire capitalism.
Right.
But at the same time, people who like capitalism will readily use in a pejorative sense, state capitalism or political capitalism. And so it's a slippery word if you can totally change the meaning just by sticking another, a modifier in front of it.
Right.
State capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism are not the same thing. So there's a danger in using a common term.
Right. Yeah. Well, anytime, and this is one of the things that I've kind of run into, and I've just turned to calling myself a straight anarchist. Is I guess that's the influence of Voltairine de Cleyre. When I read her essay on panarchy, I was like, oh, okay, because I always, I'm always trying to convey the message that the reason that things become isms, whether it's capitalism or socialism or communism, is because of the existence of the state. That the state, forcing these systems down our throat are what constitutes an ism. And in that we have to get away from the common state terms. Now, I tend to make the argument to libertarians to not use the term capitalism out of a semantic argument. I'm like, look, man, if you talk to the average person today, what we have in America is capitalism. That's what this is. And most people are not satisfied with the government restricting and regulating and dictating how this comes about. So it seems like a useless term when you're trying to promote freedom in a free market. Mm-hmm. So that's always kind of the angle I always take.
Right, and I'm trying to reach a very wide audience, not just talk to libertarians or people that are already friendly to markets. And if that word is a turnoff, then that's a problem. That's a problem. Right. So I talk in terms of what I think is are better descriptive terms. And another weird thing about the word capitalism is that it yields the word capitalist. But a capitalist, when you say socialist, you mean somebody who advocates socialism. It doesn't really tell you what that person does. Right. Take the word capitalist. Is that somebody who's an advocate of capitalism, or is that someone who, owns capital and invests it and produces goods for the market? I mean, that's also what we call a capitalist, right? He's not an employee, so he's not getting wages. He makes his living by getting profits, entrepreneurial profits. Right. And so it's used in both ways. And that introduces an ambiguity. A person can be a capitalist in the sense of his activity, but not be a capitalist in the sense of his belief. Right. You may feel my dream is state socialism, but I have to live today. So I make my living by producing goods and selling them in the market. I got to live. So I can't live as if we were in a socialist world. So you could hear there's a socialist capitalist in a sense, or a capitalist socialist. Right. So it does help confuse things.
Absolutely. Because what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's because a capitalist is actually actively participating in capitalism, whereas a socialist just has an idea in a lot of ways. So it's the activity of. And this is where that whole term exploiting comes into play, because what the capitalists do is they leverage their political clout in order for beneficial, ends in their particular market. So we're not even close to advocating that. We're advocating, as Charles Johnson pointed out, the best way to say it, freed markets, because it's a market it's never been free before. We're trying to actually actively do something that has never been done. And one of the things you point out, and it got me thinking, it was in the first chapter of your new book, and you're talking about cooperation. And you're talking about how the markets, a freed market, would bring about cooperation. And I have friends that are syndicalists. And I mean, we disagree on all kinds of things, but we agree on a lot of things as well. And one of the things I have trouble like conveying to them and getting my point across with them is that the freed market would actually, it would benefit, it would incentivize cooperation, and not through competitive means, you would begin to cooperate with each other in order to get ahead.
Yeah.
And I loved how you covered that. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Well, that's a theme throughout the book that comes up in many of the chapters. By the way, there are a lot of chapters, but the chapters are relatively short. So,
Yeah.
and people can jump around. You really need to read it in order. It's a collection of essays, but they're the longest essay may be 2,000 words. So I don't have very, very long chapters, which is why there could be so many in a book that's not that thick.
Right.
It's under 300 pages. But that's a theme that goes throughout the book, and it's a very important one. So I'm glad you're bringing it up so early. Markets are cooperation. By the way, one thing I want to say is, not everybody who would be described as a capitalist, in other words, an owner of capital, is somebody who's looking for favors from government. So you can own capital, which technically makes you a capitalist, right? And also be against, just like you could be a socialist capitalist, you could be a free market capitalist.
Right.
All capital is the money asset, right? That an enterpriser possesses, which he's going to then use, and he might have accumulated it in a totally honorable, perfectly moral way through trade, and saved his money. That's his capital, which he's then going to use. It's an asset of it's an asset of production, right? He's going to put it into his enterprise in order to produce goods that consumers then will be free to accept or reject, depending on if they like the terms and if they find use in the good. So that's all capital is. Capitalism is the money, and it's like having machines, right, or tools. It's a tool. Yeah. It's then used to. It's an infusion. It gives you access to resources, which then you can convert into useful goods for people. So it's a neutral term. The word capital, there's nothing wrong. In a free market, there is capital, and that's fine. And since it's money, and this is kind of the Mises point, a Ludwig von Mises point. Since you can convert all kinds of assets into money terms, you can then do economic calculation, which is very important for people planning their activities, and also for consumers judging products. Prices convey very important information about scarcity. So money prices, you can't get prices without money. This has always been the flaw in central planning, right? If you abolish the market, which is what Marx wanted to do, abolish money and markets and find some other way to allocate goods, you're flying blind. The planner doesn't have the information he would need to intelligently plan, even if he has the best intentions. He wants to bring prosperity to his population. He's not just a selfish power seeker. He really does want to improve the material position of his society. He won't be able to do it because he won't have prices with which to calculate. This was Mises' great 1920, here we are 100 years out, contribution to show that central planning, whether you're going to call it communism or socialism or fascism for that matter, can't work. It just cannot work because the planner can't have the information that only the market can generate. How does it generate that? If people own their own stuff and trade, you get and money will, of course, will emerge from that because money is more convenient than barter. Then you're going to get money prices, and with money prices, you can do accounting. You can figure out this strategy is a better strategy than this strategy, because you can convert everything to a single money unit. So that's one approach. The point about competition and cooperation is extremely important, and again, it dominates this book. Everybody has a good, cozy feeling about competition, right? The left loves competition. The statist left loves competition, and they have an aesthetic. I think a lot of the revulsion against markets is aesthetic, and I discussed this in one particular chapter of the book. So it's not so much theoretical or moral or economic, but some people just have an aesthetic aversion to competition, right? They say, no, why do we need, they'll say, they'll put dog eat dog in front of it, right? Dog eat dog competition. and they see you. So what's the alternative? They'll say, well, cooperation is the alternative. So I'm trying to smash that and show that these are two sides of the same coin. These are not opposites, because you get, when you have freedom to cooperate with whomever you believe is going to, be the best person for you to cooperate with, there's going to be competition, right? I walk into a shopping mall, I need shoes. I need a pair of shoes. I walk into a mall and there's 2 or 3 shoe stores. Those 3 shoe stores are competing with each other, no doubt about it. But what are they competing to do? They're competing to cooperate with me. And I have a free choice, which of the 3, or I could even go to another mall, of course, but let's keep it simple. So they're competing to be the one I cooperate with. So they're offering what they were, sales or better products or lower prices or whatever they can do to say, me, cooperate with me. So cooperation and competition are not opponents. They don't clash. If people are free, they're going to want to cooperate. And if they're free to choose with whom they're going to cooperate, then you're going to get cooperation. They're going to get competition. There's nothing nasty about it. What turns nasty is when people turn to the state to quash their competition, to limit their competition so that they're the only one or one of only a few. That hurts consumers. That hurts the people out there looking to cooperate, because their choice is now limited by the anti-competitive actions of government. And just about everything the government does, whether it's intended or not, and so often it is intended, is designed to limit or eliminate competition. But if you can't do that with also limiting cooperation, they go together. That's a big theme of my book.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I always try to bring up is that when competition incentivizes people to act in a more honest way. It's because if you see that the people that, let's just say my grocery store down the street, they're being dishonest and they're charging exorbitantly high prices for green beans, then I'm going to go 10 minutes further down the road to the Walmart and I'm going to buy green beans there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like that the fact that there's a competitive market where they could lose your business, forces them to be more honest about the way that they do business. And so you can't overstate how the competition incentivizes the honest interactions in the market.
Right. Competitors keep potential cooperators honest.
Right.
That's again, when there's no privilege, and by privilege I'm using state favors that either hamper or totally eliminate competitors. So you're right. So we're ruling that out. We're ruling out going to the state to get limits on your competitors or to even bar them from the marketplace, which some, occupational licensing, I could go through a whole list of ways the state limits competition on behalf of some favored group or individual. So what you said is absolutely right. Competitors keep cooperators honest because they have an interest in pointing out that this other competitor, this other potential cooperator, is selling a shoddy good or selling it for more than it, way above cost. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to charge that much because he then offers a lower price. And that forces, I don't mean by physical force, but there's a sense in which it forces prices down toward the costs of producing that thing. And
right.
I have a chapter on that very point about the cost of production and what cooperation does to force prices down toward their cost of production.
Yeah.
Which means and another thing this means, I think people have an aesthetic aversion to the idea of profit. For a lot of here, what's the famous phrase that the left likes to use? The state is left. People before profits. But that's absurd. That's ridiculous. Because in a market, again, without privilege, the way you make profits is by offering people good deals that they, in a way can't resist. They like what you're selling, they need the thing, or they find it useful, and you're offering the most attractive terms. So if if that price that they're willing to pay in the market is higher than all of your expenses, then you've made an entrepreneurial profit. It's, in fact, in a truly free market, profit is a signal that you are serving consumers well.
Yeah,
and high profits means you're doing it very well. But on the other hand, if you have high profits are also an invitation to competition. So we have to remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And profits can be fleeting. Entrepreneurial profit can be fleeting because as soon as other people learn what you're doing, they will then compete with you, and that will then shrink the profit. So you don't get permanent profits without government privileges.
Right.
But otherwise, profits are a signal that you are serving consumers well. In other words, you're serving your fellow man, right? Your fellow person. Something the statist left doesn't understand, right? They think your profits mean you're screwing people, but that's just wrong, because they're not separating privilege from the free market. That's the key.
Right. Well, and I had even heard Chomsky make the comment that without the state, there would be no such thing as a corporation. That the state makes corporations possible. I mean, and he'll even admit that. And I'm like, well, why can't we get you just a little bit further? You know, just a little bit further. Let's get your economics fixed now. but so, and that's one of the really hard points to make with my left friends that are syndicalists is, look, man, if the state didn't exist, Amazon wouldn't have control of the market in the way it does. That there wouldn't be all these arbitrary measures that you have to bypass that the state puts in your way, and there would be smaller companies coming up trying to compete with Amazon because there's money in that market. There's money there. Everybody sees that there's money there. I would love the opportunity to compete with an Amazon or a Walmart, but in order to enter that field, it would cost me, millions of dollars because of all the arbitrary, barriers that are put up on entry into these markets. And so the state actually creates the atmosphere, the environment for the possibility of monopolies and for corporations to exist and be able to exploit workers, because nobody can explain to me or argue the fact that Walmart can afford to pay all these fees and fines and barriers into entry, whereas Joe Bob's shop down the street, they can't afford to enter that market. They can't afford to compete with somebody of that size because they don't have the capital up front to pay for it. And so freeing these markets, getting the intervention of the government out of our way to be able to compete openly and honestly with each other would completely change the spectrum.
Yeah, let me introduce a couple of caveats. First, on Chomsky, it's funny because there's almost a schizophrenia there, right? Because one day Chomsky could say, well, big business would never want laissez-faire. Well, that sounds like he ought to be for laissez-faire then, right? He doesn't like big business.
Right.
But that's not the position he takes.
Right.
He says so in other words, they love all of the subsidies and the privileges and the help they get from the state, and they get to manipulate the state, which is in largely true, certainly in a lot of ways. But on the other hand, he doesn't see laissez-faire as therefore being good for people, good for just regular people who want to prosper and not be under any thumb of any powerful person. He doesn't realize that. He seems to realize that corporate power is a derivative of government power. I call it the most dangerous derivative because people don't like derivatives, right? Because of the financial world and all that stuff. And if you remember the 2008 collapse, right? Everybody was talking about derivatives based on mortgages, et cetera. And that's when I dubbed corporate power as the most dangerous derivative. What they mean by corporate power, in any bad sense, you don't get without government power. So one day he seems to know that, and then he kind of forgets it and says, laissez-faire wouldn't be good for people. I don't want to rule out the possibility that in a truly free market, you could get something that looks like a corporation with stock shares and stuff like that.
Okay.
I just don't want to rule out the possibility. It would not look like corporations today. As far as cost to entry, it's certainly possible that in a free market, a company that was highly successful was making lots of money, and maybe it is the kind of an auto firm or something where there is a big upfront cost. That may well be true.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the enterprise itself has done anything wrong. It just may be the nature of that particular business. So it's certainly true in our time, and the internet and open source software and machine tools, which are now computer designed. The price of that stuff has come so far down. I mean, publishing. Look at software for publishing, and and self-publishing and print on demand and stuff like that. The entry barrier, just from simply economic costs, for a lot of fields, a lot of kinds of work, has plummeted, which means it's more open to people than ever before. Right. And that's the result of technology. So just because a company has gotten big, a company can get big because it may just be it had the entrepreneur might have realized people are going to want something before anybody realized it, including the people themselves. We don't always know what we want until we see it in the marketplace. I mean, how we know that's true. Yeah. So what the market rewards, what we reward, really, when I say the market, we're the market.
Right.
The market's not some separate thing that rewards people. We end up rewarding that ingenious entrepreneur who hits on an idea long before anybody else. And maybe he's in the field kind of by himself for a while. Quote, he's a monopoly only in the sense that he's a single seller, not that he's got any favors, but he's the only one for a while because this person was so, alert to what people might want, and he brought up resources that were undervalued because no one had this idea of how to use them yet. Turns it into this thing that's really a hit with people. Wow, I never even knew I wanted that, but I really like that, and I like the price, and I'm going to buy it, and lots of other people go out and buy it. That person's going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so if it's a high cost entry because you need a lot of heavy machinery, let's say, that's going to be some barrier to new competitors, but not all new competitors, because there are other people out there who have capital maybe that they made in other fields will say, you know what, I think I'm going to try my hand at this other thing that that guy's given me an idea to do. And as long as there are no barriers to that, then that monopoly status won't last. And if he tries to take advantage of his monopoly status, he's just going to be inviting new competitors.
Right.
High profits are an invitation to new competitors.
Yeah, absolutely.
High profits don't bar people. High profits do not bar entry to a field. Right. It's an invitation. It's like standing on the roof saying, hey, everybody, this is the place to be. Look at the profits I'm making. You want to keep people out of your industry? Keep your profits very low. Make them very low. Then people say, why do I want to go there? The profits are low. I'll go somewhere else where profits are higher. Right. That's counterintuitive. Something the anti-market left, or anybody, there's anti-market right people too, they don't get that. The best barrier to entry is to keep your profits, as low as possible. Then people will say, I'll invest otherwise. Other places, why do we want to invest there?
Right. No, yeah, you're.
So you got to think. You got to think 2 and 3 steps ahead. People only look at the one immediate effect of something. Henry Hazlitt wrote a book which influenced many libertarians my age. I don't know how many people read it these days. Henry Hazlitt wrote, and he was kind of a Mises disciple, economic journalist in his own right. He wrote a book called Economics in One Lesson, and the one lesson he derived from Bastiat, Frederick Bastiat, who was a great early 19th century free market guy, France. And the point was there, you got to look beyond the first effects of something. You always have to look for the secondary, tertiary, and beyond, because you can't only look at the immediate effect. You're going to miss a whole bunch of things, and that's very important.
Right. Yeah. I really feel what you're saying. I think what I was trying to draw the picture of is the if you look at what happened with Airbnb or Uber when they first came out, the hotel industry attacked Airbnb, and their entire thing was, well, these people should have to follow the same regulations we follow. It's not, well, you should lift these regulations off of our shoulders. You should unburden us with these regulations. No. Make them, they're competing with us, so make them follow the same regulations. And that's what I'm getting at. Those regulations, that regulatory burden that is put on the mom and pop. I mean, how many people would be able to enter into new areas of competition if there weren't these regulatory burdens put on them? I mean, we look at just like the thing's been going around for years now about hairdressers having to pay $30,000 to get a license from the government. Like, why? What good does that do? If they screw my hair up,
well, and we know the answer. We know the answer. The incumbent practitioners don't want new competition.
Exactly.
That's true of doctors. The doctors did it. Everybody does it. The lawyers did it. And look, you mentioned Airbnb. You also mentioned Uber, and so the story's the same with Uber. When Uber came along, and Lyft got into it fairly soon, so even Uber had competition at that level. But all the monopoly taxi companies that were licensed by their towns and cities tried to stop Uber and Lyft. And, Uber and Lyft, while those drivers are subcontractors, they're not employees. In California, they passed a law to treat them as employees, even though they don't want to be employees and their employer doesn't want to be, and the company doesn't want them regarded as employees. But there still is a company there, right? Uber and Lyft. What we haven't seen yet, and it'd be interesting to search for the barriers to this, or why aren't these drivers just doing peer-to-peer, right? Without there being Uber or Lyft. Right. Why aren't the drivers just all linked in by their app and stuff like that? That's a good question. I've seen the question raised, but I haven't seen anybody yet study that. Some grad student ought to do a dissertation on why we haven't seen that yet. What kind of barriers might there be to that?
Well, and I kind of imagine, I wrote an article actually that was published at the Libertarian Institute about that type of a peer-to-peer, organization or website or app, for security agencies to compete with the police. Because I'm like, if you want to end the problems that we see with policing, what you need to do is you need to open the market up. You need more competition. Yeah. You need people that can be fired by the people that they're sworn to serve and protect, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And so we could easily envision a situation in which these are the ways that we're using technology to move freedom forward and to discover more of a freed market, and do things from more of an agorist kind of point of view, a kind of perspective where you're working outside the scope and the boundaries of the government and their reach. And so I think that is extremely important for libertarians to talk about that, more today than ever, because we have the opportunities to create these kinds of platforms that are available for the average person to engage in.
Yeah, and this is a good point, good time to bring up, as long as we're talking about barriers to entry and barriers to competition, we have to talk about intellectual property, which is very important.
Right.
And I don't believe is widely understood, even by some libertarians, about how that limits and outlaws competition. Because what a patent does is basically outlaw imitation. But imitation is extremely important. Bastiat was a huge advocate of imitation. And while he didn't talk directly about the patents or copyrights, it's clear what he was getting at, that if others can't copy, then by law, then you're limiting competition. Now, that doesn't mean that a company, whatever is making, might keep some secrets to it, trade secrets. In other words, not use the government, but just try to keep things close to the chest. They're welcome to try to do that. But as Bastiat pointed out, that kind of information gets out. It just gets out. First of all, you can look at a product and maybe reverse engineer or figure out what the person's doing. So it's not only important because people then can compete with the first producer, let's say, by imitating, but a very important point is that by imitating, there's almost like a Darwinian process here. By imitating and let's say copying an idea, that idea is going to change in the copying. I mean, we've all experienced this. We're trying to do something someone else did, and we hit on some innovation we didn't even expect. It could be on some small thing, right? You're trying to do, you observe what someone's doing. I'm not talking about an economic problem, just in your own life. You like what someone is doing, and you then say, hey, I'm going to do that too. But in the very copying of it, you get sort of a Darwinian mutation, right? You by mistake or just by stumbling on it, by serendipity, you make some change, and you say, hey, you know what? I like that better than the original.
Right.
That's how ideas advance. Matt Ridley, who's a very good and important writer, science writer, but also a writer about how progress is made, and he has a book called The Evolution of All Things, where he's talking about evolution outside the biological area. Societies evolve. Mm-hmm. He points out that the way he puts it in a particularly colorful way. He says ideas have sex, right? Two ideas, when they collide or meet, you get a third idea. Mm-hmm. As a result of the combination. So, two innovators who are at a conference together or just talking with each other, a new idea can come out of that, and that's what you get from the mixing of ideas. And so it's similar to what I'm saying about this evolutionary idea. It's kind of a positive mutation, and then in a way a natural selection, right? I like what you're making, and I want to get into that field. So okay, I'm going to make that too, and then I discover, hey, wait a second, I came up with a little twist on it that makes it even better, and I go in the marketplace, and guess what? People like my twist more than they like your original. Now I'm the one doing well. So that's what I mean by natural selection, right? The consumers say, hey, there's always some benefit to being the first to market with something, some new idea that no one has ever produced before. There's definitely advantages to be the first. But there's also advantages to being the second and the third, because you can make improvements over the first, because it's not likely that somebody's going to think of everything. No one person kind of thinks of everything,
right,
even in a narrow field. Or, we're just not cut out that way. I don't know how familiar you are with the early days of personal computing, but the first kind of portable, it was really luggable, but the first portable computer was the Osborne. Right? It looked like a sewing machine. It was a big thing. It was heavy. It was like 50 pounds or more. But unlike a big desktop IBM, you could carry it around on a handle, and you took the lid off, and that was the keyboard, and that exposed a little screen. And people went gaga about this. Great. This was a breakthrough in 1980 or whatever the year was. But it had its own limits. It was a 5-inch screen. That's a pretty small screen. And then the K-Pro company comes along and improves on it. They have a bigger screen, better resolution. It's still pretty luggable. It's not the easiest thing to carry around. It's like a sewing machine, 55 pounds or so.
Right.
But there's a definite advantage of being second, because let the first guy, be the pioneer, and the market will show his errors, and then maybe you can jump in and be the second. And so you don't have to be the first to make big profits.
Well, I mean,
did very well for a long time.
Yeah, this is you can find this everywhere in history. Henry Ford is often considered the inventor of the automobile, but he didn't invent the automobile. He came up with the assembly line. That's what his big trade-off was. It was to the industry, and so it was the invention of the assembly line that made the automobile more affordable for your every man, average ordinary guys. And the competition entering the market actually brings the prices down so that other people can start to afford, your middle class and lower class citizens can begin to buy cars and things of that nature because that competition and created a cooperation between the companies and the citizenry through the dropping of prices. And so,
right, things don't remain luxuries for long if you have a good amount of freedom. So imagine if you have complete freedom without the government involvement.
Well, and
that would speed it up, the process up even more. I mean, why didn't the car remain the thing? Why isn't today cars only available to the wealthiest people?
Or electricity.
Right. Luxuries quickly become necessities that everybody has and no one could live without.
Right.
And yet, the ballpoint pen, when it first came out, I don't know what year, it was like, I don't know, $19, $20, when $19 and $20 was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't last, but it didn't last. And we've lived that, at least I've lived through that. The first pocket calculator was very expensive.
Yeah.
Now they were given away before the smartphone. They were given away as for advertising. You'd stamp on the back of your company, and I have some that were just given away. They were fine. Now, who buys a calculator?
Right.
You already have it in your phone.
Yeah. Well, and I remember it
along with your camera and video camera, and so that's the way it goes. And that's even happening with all the government intervention, all the government obstacles. Imagine if those obstacles were not there.
Well, and this is just kind of like how much things have changed. I can remember, I mean, I'm 40, I'll be 41 in about a month. So I remember in the 90s going through high school, and you're in calculus. I took calculus and trigonometry. I really liked math, and I remember the teachers saying, "No, I want you to show us your work. Show your work. You're not always going to have a calculator on you." Little did they know.
Yeah, they got that wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's just things just have advanced so far, and just continue to move and move and move. And
that's the way it goes. I mean, look, the price of food, again, and I'll keep saying it'll get monotonous, even in our highly burdened economy with government privilege, the price of food has plummeted, even though the population of the world is at, the highest it's ever been. But food is a smaller part of the average person's budget in the United States and most of the world, than ever before. So we have a larger population, yet we're growing so much food that the price is low, and it's a smaller part of people's cost of living. That's the way markets work. And luckily, our markets haven't been abolished. They're heavily burdened. And of course, what we're trying to do is get those burdens lifted. But
right.
That's just a preview of what we would see in a freed market, to use that. That's a great term, and that was actually coined, I think, by William Gillis of C4SS. But,
was it Gillis? I thought
I think
it was
he first came out.
Johnson.
We think Johnson's used it, but I think Gillis actually was the first to put it that way, which means the freeing lies ahead.
Right.
It's not something
it hasn't happened
in the 19th century or the 20th century. Yeah, it's still ahead.
Right.
Now, but we still are market oriented, and we're getting benefits of markets. We're not getting as much as we can, and not all segments of society are getting as much as we would be getting.
Right.
So that's why there's still people who are poor and lagging. But even in the West, and certainly the United States, poor people are still among the richest people who ever lived in the history of the world. I mean, if you think about the history of the world, mankind is 150 years old, 150,000 years old, I think, by the most modest estimate, maybe more than that, 200,000. Think about how poor people have been, including the richest people in those societies up till, relatively recent times. It's incredible. People don't appreciate that either. And world poverty, absolute poverty, whatever the UN calls it, has fallen by half in the last 20 years. And yet people don't appreciate that. That's because of global trade. Now, I'm not endorsing globalization, that brand name, because there's a lot of bad stuff, including intellectual property rules that the U.S. often forces on other countries. Right. But nevertheless, worldwide trade, which means worldwide division of labor, has brought the price of things down and made them much more abundant, to the point where in the last 20 years or so, absolute poverty has fallen by half. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Now,
that's not because of the government. That's not because of welfare. It's because of Mark. Adam Smith said that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, which is true, right? The fewer people you have, the less the division of labor can be developed.
Right.
There's just too few people. That's why a self-sufficient family is never going to be rich. I mean, not even comfortable. I mean, they may have a subsistence that they can, live on, but there's going to be limits because you only have a few hands. Imagine if the whole world's involved in the marketplace, then you get this really elaborate division of labor, which brings down costs and prices and makes things more and more abundant all the time.
Right. Yeah.
That's good for the most vulnerable people.
Right. And I think that the more freed a market is, that it seems to me it would be more of a gig economy. I could be wrong, but I think there would be more entrepreneurship. There would be more self-employed people. It just seems like that's how it would go. And so that we're running.
I think it would be lower. It would lower the cost of those things, so therefore you'd get more of it. How much? I'm not in a position to predict.
Right.
Maybe there'd be much less wage labor.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Barriers. And what wage labor remained would be much more attractive. And what wage labor remained, however much was left, and I don't know, maybe it'd be a lot, maybe it'd be a little, but however much was left would still be more attractive to the people who were wage workers, because for one thing, they'd have more clout. Because if you can quit the job and start a business, doesn't have to be a big business, so start a business that you can live on, then you have clout with your employer. You can sing that old song to him, take this job and shove it.
Yeah.
But if the barriers to self-employment or small-scale neighborhood enterprise with your neighbors, your friends, if the costs of that are high because of taxes and all kinds of other things, IP, all the things we mentioned, licensing, if the costs are high, then you can't readily say to your boss without notice, I'm out of here. Because you're out of here. Okay, what do I do then? And also having your health insurance linked to your employer is another tether that prevents, impedes or prevents mobility, where people would move, except, oh my gosh, I'll be giving up all those health benefits. That's a very bad thing. It was a very bad thing that came about with a lot of government intervention behind it.
Yeah.
Why get health insurance from employer? It makes no sense. You don't get life insurance from your employer. You don't get car insurance from your employer. Why do you get why do you don't get house insurance or home renter's insurance from your employer? Why do you get health insurance?
Yeah.
Well, because the IRS made a decision when there was wage and price controls in World War II. They made a decision that if employers and they couldn't raise wages to attract employees, they offered them health benefits instead. The IRS said, okay, we won't count that as income. We won't tax it. So we're living with that legacy. Time price controls, and yet it tethers people to jobs.
Yeah, it
reduces
does.
Mobility.
I mean,
that's bad.
How
if you reduce mobility by government, that's bad.
How expensive is it to pay for Cobra so while you're in between jobs or until your next job begins to pick up your health insurance? It's it's insane. It's an insane amount of money.
Before World War II, people got health insurance through mutual aid societies, not through their employer, but through lodges, and were known as mutual aid societies, friendly societies, they called them in England. And these were not companies. In other words, these were owned by the members, right? It was a mutual aid society. It was mutual in both senses. People helping each other, but also they all owned it. It was like, in a way, a co-op. And a lot of them would employ doctors, general practitioners. So when you were a member, you and your family had access to this GP. And there was other forms. If you got sick, you could draw benefits from your mutual aid society to tide you over till you were well. It was insurance, but it wasn't commercial insurance. No, there was commercial insurance too.
Right.
Wealthy people didn't need mutual aid societies. They had the money to have insurance or to pay out of pocket if they got sick or something like that. it was working people who flocked to mutual aid societies.
Yeah.
And David Beto, a very good historian, has a book called From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State, which is a history of mutual aid societies in the United States, and it's definitely worth reading. He's a very good historian, and he pays attention to stuff like this, and he's done this entire book. It's been around a while now. I guess it came out in the 80s probably, on this history of mutual aid societies, which people didn't know about, and especially what they called lodge doctors. The lodge would employ a doctor. You'd be under an annual contract, and then you as a member and your families had access to this doctor when you needed GP services.
Right.
Guess who was against this? The medical societies. Because even though these were doctors, these were real doctors, they didn't like that they were going into this innovative way of this kind of maverick form of practice, and they thought, hey, you're going to drive the price down of you're going to drive our incomes down.
Right.
And so they didn't like it, and they tried to smash them. They tried to get them to lose their privileges at hospitals, and they put them down as being, that became an insult. He's a lodge doctor. In other words, he can't just open up a practice. He's not good enough, so he's a lodge doctor. It was just a smear, but it was anti-competitive. This is even before medical licensing came in.
Well, there's oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, the incumbents don't like innovation in forms of competition and in products. And they will, when the state's available, they'll turn to the state to stifle it. We got to make sure the state's not available for those kinds of activities.
I was just going to point out that this idea is actually kind of recycling right now. I did a podcast a few months ago with an attorney friend of mine out of Fort Worth about private membership associations. And so what's happening is, because, like, let's say I live right at the border of Louisiana and Texas, and let's say there's a doctor here in the Beaumont area that people in Louisiana near the border want to utilize. He's not allowed to accept their insurance from Louisiana. So what these doctors have started doing is they've started these sign-up programs, these membership programs, to where these people from other states can come pay like $50 a month, and they have full access to their care instead of going through an insurance company. And so there's this kind of back door.
It's worth. Yeah, people will find innovations that way, right? Until some law gets passed to stop that. We should mention that let's mention the pandemic for a moment. We should note that a whole slew of regulations, both medical and otherwise, have been waived since the pandemic hit, because people have realized that there were barriers to responding to the pandemic. These were all regulations which, when they were put in place before the pandemic, you would have been told these were all common sense regulations. We need these. These are very important. And what happened when this emergency hit? They were struck with sanity, and they removed them. Now, unfortunately, it was only temporary, I'm sure, because once this is all over, if it ever ends, I'll bet they're going to restore some of that stuff. So we got to keep saying, wait a second, you took it off during an emergency. What do you want to put it back on for? These were bad ideas, like telemedicine. Now being allowed, or practicing across state lines. Licensing. In all kinds of things, licensing is a state thing, which means if you have a license in one state, you can't necessarily practice in another state.
Well, I mean, just something else. We saw it as simple as who's allowed to make masks. That's right. That's right.
So, we can't let people forget that, because once this is over, how the memory is very short.
Right.
And there'll be people who want those things restored because it benefits them. The people that got them in the first place will want them back. And the rest of us have to be screaming, no, don't put those things back. You already acknowledged they were bad ideas. What do we need in normal times if it was harming, and these were harming us in this during the emergency? So,
right. Well, we're at an hour. We're at an hour. I want to wrap up with you, but I wanted to ask you one more question.
Sure. Yeah, please.
as far as strategy goes, what do you make of the agorist strategy whenever it comes to introducing the idea of a freed market to the population?
Well, I understand it as people looking for opportunities to get around the government barriers, the privileges, and produce for the market goods and services free, de facto, not de jure, but free of all the obstacles that the government has thrown in the way in order to privilege somebody else.
Right.
That's a great strategy, and I hope people are constantly looking for that. We call it the black market or the gray market, and it doesn't have to mean that it's quote, a harmful substance. People can be in a gray market making something that you find on the shelf at a store, but just cheaper and maybe better. Especially as we said, with the cost of technology coming down, thanks to computers and the internet and all this stuff. Single, individuals or maybe a couple of people together can be doing what it took big companies to do not that long ago.
Right.
If you can get around IP, find a way to get around IP and these other obstacles, I'm for that. Right. Let's not wait until we get these things repealed, because unfortunately that may still be a long time off. So if people are out there looking for a way to say, I'm going to pretend those things don't exist, more power to them. Power in a good sense, economic power.
Right. Okay. Well, I just kind of wanted to get your opinion, because to me, the agorist strategy really ties in with the ideas of the freed market. Like, it's just, it seems to me like it's just taking the ideas and putting it into action, and you're just, and that's all there is to it. Okay. Well, tell us about your book, man. We didn't talk a lot about it. We did mention it, but I want you to tell us all about it before we get off, where it can be found and all that good jazz.
Well, the name is, you can search my name on Amazon. You can also get it at the Libertarian Institute, which is libertarianinstitute.org, where I'm executive editor. It's called What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. It's available in paperback and Kindle. And I hope people will read it and give it to their left-wing friends, but give it to the right-wing friends too. I think everybody, I hope, can learn from it. It's not directed at one group of people. It's an attempt to make a theoretical, moral, and aesthetic case for markets. Markets are beautiful, and that's one of the chapters, actually. Markets are beautiful. Well, they are, because it's social cooperation. It's social cooperation, and we are social cooperative animals. And so the market is. That doesn't mean everything's the market, right? Families are not the market. Right. Friendships. So it doesn't mean the market is every aspect of life, but it's a very important aspect of life. Right. And if we take it away, we're in very bad straits.
Yeah, and one of the things I actually mentioned this to my wife last night when I was reading it. I looked over at her and I just kind of chuckled. I said, Sheldon is one of my favorite thinkers for this reason. I was like, because whenever he's breaking down these subjects, as philosophical as he wants to get, he's able to just dissect it and just peel the onion apart and get you right down into the core of it. So you take me on a journey through the entire thought process, and I really appreciate that.
Well, nice to hear that, because I do. That's what I aim to do. So it's always gratifying to hear. Yeah, have somebody tell me that I've carried out my mission, because that's what I do try to do.
Yeah, I mean, you make it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you make it super accessible.
Well, thanks.
I'm just a dumb truck driver, so I can read it and understand. Anybody can. So.
Well, I think a whole lot of people can read that book and get something out of it. Maybe come across an insight that they didn't think of before. Yeah. I don't really claim any huge originality, but I hope my exposition of it is clear enough, and I try to break it down. First I'm explaining it to myself, and then at the same time, then I pass it on to other people. So I think anybody ought to be able to get something out of it, even advanced readers. So by the way, I really seriously doubt if you and other truck drivers are dumb, but I'm sure. I know you were just being funny.
I do that sometimes.
That's okay.
All right, man.
Hey,
Well,
a lot of people are a whole lot smarter than I am.
I really appreciate your time.
So if I can get what's in that book, plenty of people can.
There you go. Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate you inviting me on the podcast.
Hopefully we can do it again.
Please, you know where
All
to
right.
find me.
All right, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Take care. Bye bye.